and I'm going to kick off. So our running order this evening is Harry from Zedify, and she's going to kick off in a minute because she's got to dash off and do childcare. And then we're going to Bob and hopefully Roger Geffen, if he's with us yet, to do some news roundups. And then finally, we've got Ben from Pedal Me. And Ruth's last word from somewhere, if she doesn't disappear under the Channel Tunnel, last words from Ruth. So that's the plan. How does it sound? Everybody happy? Give me a thumbs up. Yes, we're off. Right, Harry, you're first. Would you mind sharing your screen?
Absolutely. Here we go. We'll see that okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me to today's Ideas with Beers. I got asked about some really interesting topics by Roxanne, so hopefully I'll get to the nub of them all. I'm going to set the scene with looking at some of the pressures affecting urban logistics, look at the size of the urban delivery market and the opportunity for cycle logistics, touch a bit on some of the drivers for change, like consumer needs and what kind of speed of adoption we're seeing across the logistics space. And then just a short sum of where we're at, Zedify, in terms of investment, expansion, and finally looking at some of our measurable impacts. So, you know, what we're all about really, which is about delivering cities that are better for everyone. So, as most of you probably well know, we've got increasing pressures on cities in terms of congestion, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, you know, transport still being the UK's biggest emitting sector. And parcel deliveries are on the rise, perhaps slightly lessened by the current economic climate. But if we're going to see anything like this 36% rise in delivery vehicles by 2030 that the World Economic Forum predicts, then we need to completely rewrite how goods move around within them. And Zedify and other leaders in this space have been doing just that for years. And now we're starting to see a really exciting change in brands and logistic carriers who are really recognizing a need for a new approach. And we need that pace of change to really pick up. So I guess to put that in a bit of context, we'll just take a really brief look at two conventional approaches to urban logistics and some of the issues there. Here you've got a conventional next day service that's long stem delivery model with out of town regional distribution hubs, fleets of diesel vans going into the city centre, carrying out a very linear route. And that has, you know, multiple negative impacts for the city, but it also has impacts for the service quality that you're able to offer to consumers in terms of time windows, which we're seeing as an increasing kind of emerging need that we need to address. Next up, here's a classic same day model, which when I was looking at earlier, I thought looked like some kind of unwinnable game of Snake on an old Nokia phone. But you've got like delivery vehicles basically crisscrossing all over town, no consolidation, half empty vehicles, and it's extremely inefficient. It's obviously driven by urgent time requirements and that kind of change in expectation that we've seen from consumers. But because it's a high mileage per delivery and, you know, you can't do the consolidation because it's point to point, it's obviously really expensive. And, you know, there's those bad impacts for the city again. And a big proportion of that same work could be consolidated. Next up, looking at consumer needs. Obviously, we've got this increasing demand from consumers on sustainability in all angles, and that covers sustainable deliveries too. But I think it's important to take note of the other kind of drivers as well. You know, cost is obviously a big factor, but it's interesting because some research shows that convenience and choice is a bigger impact. So there's an IMRG report that says 48% of consumers are happy to pay for convenience, and that's about time windows and choice there. So what does Zedify's model look like, and how does it help with some of those issues? We've got three main elements, and I'll talk about the first two. So the first is micro consolidation, our consolidation hubs, which act as gateways for goods heading to and from our service areas, whether that's you know, inbound freight, working with retailers and carriers, local freight, working with independent businesses like, you know, coffee roasteries, florists, gift shops, that kind of thing, or outbound freight, and that's anything from retail returns or perhaps reverse logistics for recycling, or even shipping. So, you know, a brand that's working in a city and wants to ship to customers across the UK. And by having a hub that's hyper local to an area, you're able to consolidate all of that same day, last mile, first mile work into highly optimized routes and combine, you know, all of those different tasks for different clients. So much less of all of the kind of mess of routing that you saw in the previous slides. We're known for our fleets of cargo bikes, so 95% of our fleet are cargo bikes, and you know, they're, as you probably well know, very suited to the urban environment. A number of reasons: you can park right outside, they've been proven to be, you know, considerably faster than vans, all of that helps to drive down cost. But it's about the kind of knock-on benefits as well, in terms of the piece of the puzzle that cycle logistics can play in helping to create a livable city that encourages cycling and walking. And then just very briefly, the tech system just ties all those things together, because something kind of off the shelf doesn't prioritise consolidation and cycle logistics and cycle infrastructure. So what does that look like if you're going to compare it on the map? Here's a city that looks suspiciously like London. With our hubs, they have they work best within a 3-mile radius from that hub. And in small cities, you're probably only going to need one hub to service that whole kind of central area where cargo bikes work best. You can combine and consolidate all of that work that we were talking about before. But in a larger city, you're going to need multiple hubs. And so in London, we're building out a mesh network where we have EV trunking between our hubs there. And that, you know, it's great because it means our customers, our carriers or retailers have flexibility about where they can inject the volumes in, you know, the closest point of entry to the city. They don't have to use the circular or across the city to drop off at our hub. But it also provides a bit of resilience. It increases our capacity. If there's any shortfalls there, we can stretch into a neighbouring area to service it. Here's just a little peek inside one of our hubs. You may recognise it if you're local. This is our Cambridge hub. Just all of the parcels being sorted there to go onto one of our trikes. And you might know Zedify's fleet, you know, the backbone of our fleet really is trikes and quads. And that's because, you know, you have the kind of, more room basically and more weight capacity. So that it just helps with our aim on consolidation. Just a little bit on, you know, adoption, basically. I think depends where you look, but about 3 billion parcels are delivered each year here in the UK. And the urban market is set to be about £3.6 billion by 2026. There's research that you'll probably have seen by ECLF, European Cycle Logistics Federation, that 50% of urban deliveries could be done by a cargo bike. But of course, currently they're not. Change takes time. And I think over time, we've been developing the right technology to best support this model. But some big changes are happening. And, you know, if you look at the UK news in just the last month, you've got Amazon, Yodel and Every all putting out big stories about their shift. And this isn't just about buying a nice shiny EAV and having a photo shoot. This is starting to see, you know, proper change. And that's because the numbers stack up. It's because of all of those increasing pressures around limitations on access in terms of legislation, low emission zones, cycle-only streets, around congestion. And, you know, to quote Rob, Zedify boss, this week, it's cargo bikes or cargo bike logistics are fundamentally, it's hit its time. And with consumer and investor demands, you're seeing brands having to take action. It's pester power, I guess, in a sense, because it's coming from maybe the consumer to the retailer, but it's also the retailer going to their carrier and then looking about what change can they see there. So just a bit on who we're working with already, and, you know, what kind of businesses work in terms of cycle logistics where we can add value. So we've got a really big range. We work with retailers, D2C brands, subscription brands, parcel carriers. We do quite a lot of work with local authorities as well, whether that's doing deliveries, you know, for a particular department or working in partnership to launch a service for local businesses in their area. And then, you know, in the 10 cities that we're in, we work with lots of independent local businesses, whether that's food and drink brands or printers, pharmacies, that kind of thing. Capturing e-commerce deliveries has always been one of our primary goals. And if you look at the opportunity there from, say, a medium retailer in a medium-sized city, something like Brighton, you know, you're looking at something like 100 parcels a day. And in order to make a model that's efficient and viable, you only need just a handful of retailers to get on board to make that work. And that's just to give you a sense of kind of what we're looking at in terms of the viability. And obviously, we've got our kind of legacy customers there, but if you were starting from scratch. Looking at where we're at in terms of our kind of geographic spread and where we're kind of at as a business. we were really lucky to get £1.2 million of funding at the start of this year, which is really exciting. It's being put towards our growth plans to expand out across the UK over the next 12 months and beyond. And that's really important for us in terms of having a spread to kind of work with Midland-based depots where, you know, we might be doing trunking with them into our cities. It's also about being an attractive opportunity for brands and retailers who, having clocked onto the fact that cycle logistics is a goer, they want to roll out that approach in multiple locations. And then I think one of the things we're battling against a little bit still is, you know, EVs being seen as the kind of go-to sustainable option for urban deliveries, and, you know, we can all stop there. And of course, they've got their place. But whether you look at cost efficiencies, with our every trial in Bristol, they saw an 18% uplift in terms of volume switching from a van to a cargo bike, or CO2 savings. So by our workings, we're 90% lower CO2 per kilometre than an EV in a city. Cargo bikes are a clear winner. And then you've got the kind of space footprint on the road, obviously, in terms of congestion impact and safety as well, in terms of encouraging active travel. And I think, you know, the urban delivery market's obviously is often associated with the gig economy. Zedify and others are kind of taking a step away from that, and it's the right approach. You know, delivery workers need to be employed fairly. And the last point, I guess, on this is just that about 2/3 of us consistently say things in surveys like, I'll be failing future generations if I don't take personal action to combat climate change. And they say that, but then obviously we make choices, all of us do, that are based more on cost and convenience. So one of the things that brands can do in terms of being able to meet that intent and close that say-do gap is making the switch to cargo bike logistics in cities, which offers, you know, a better solution for their customers and helps. It's on multiple fronts. So it's better on cost and efficiencies. It's better on choice in terms of time windows. It's better on fair employment, better on clean air, and better on climate change. So yeah, that's it. That's from me. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harry. That was excellent. So we've got you for about 4 minutes, haven't we? So we're going to crack straight on. We've got questions in the chat. Just for speed, everybody, I'll read them out rather than bring people in, although we'll bring people in later. Andy has asked, what are your decision-making triggers for the cities you target to work in? And Rachel has asked what the delivery drivers think of the experience. What's the feedback like? Do they like them? So 2 there for you, Harry. Well, you're on mute, Harry.
Sorry about that, too quick to mute. I guess our delivery drivers, typically they have come to us because they enjoy cycling. So it's a bit of a kind of captive audience in that sense. We're not transitioning from being a kind of van-based model and trying to get drivers to convert to being riders, but they do enjoy riding them. I think that's one of the things that we have in our staff survey. That's one of the, you know, biggest plus points, is they get to be out and about in the open air and ride. So people come to us because that's what they're seeking, really. And sorry, could you remind me of the other question?
What are the trigger points for which cities you move into? I'm very glad you're coming to Manchester, by the way. But yeah, so what lights the city up on your dashboard?
I think sometimes it's got to do with some of the cities that we're looking at, because some of our partners are really interested to launch there. Others, it's because there's somebody that's working in the city that wants to you know, partner with us and become a franchisee or become a partner. And in other cases, it's because the local authority, perhaps like in Bristol, where we had a really amazing grant that went towards opening. That was a, you know, tendered for grant, and that enabled us to kind of quickly open up there.
Right. So, Harry, I know we've only got you for a short while. We've got a lot of questions, actually. So we've got one around whether quads are too big for bike lanes, and does that become an issue? One around what's the sort of minimum number of households that make this model viable? One around partnering with bus companies to do some consolidation there. And whether the unregulated delivery market hampers you in terms of moving towards this different model. So any of those you want to pick up on, Harry?
Yeah, sure. I think that we're always trying to advocate for, cycle lanes, and the cycling infrastructure really needs to be, taking into account, you know, the change and the use by psychologistics companies. It's really important that happens. Some places do it better than others. I don't know what the bus partnership thing would look like. I can't quite get that one, but maybe we can pick that up again. Minimum number of households, I can't answer that either, I'm afraid, but certainly get back to whoever answer that. Love to.
Well, let's finish on that bus thing, because I'm intrigued as well. Adam, do you want to unmute yourself and ask directly?
Yeah,
what does let Harry go?
Yeah, sorry, this is more to do with, can the routes of buses be used to basically bring goods into the network from, say, outside? And in terms of using Euro crates to basically shift the stuff in and bring them in.
So as in, you're talking about like as in coaches coming into cities, or public buses, or
public buses using the routes. I was wondering if you ever considered partnering with them to kind of bring goods in rather
into
than
cities. Trains have definitely, and there's been some really good examples of that happening. Buses, I haven't heard about that before. Sounds interesting, but I haven't heard about that all.
I know trams are used as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and boats in some cases in Norwich. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. Harry, just last couple of ones from me. I just wondered, in terms of keeping the sort of innovation going, and you referred to a little bit around sustainable choices of your customers, is there a scenario where this kind of sustainable logistics becomes part of a kind of circular economy model where goods are delivered, but goods are also, you know, become part of a waste stream that's reused somewhere? Have you thought about whether you're part of some sort of ecosystem like that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think we're seeing lots of, we're partnering with some organisations already on that, like a very small operation in Brighton where it's reusable uniforms, and we deliver and collect from the doorstep at the same time. And we do work with ACS Clothing, who support all of the clothing rental. But I think there's certainly a really nice crossover with what, you know, it's all about getting resources and materials in the right place at the right time in the right condition for the circular economy, and micro hubs can play a really important role in that, because it's about bringing back and bulking up till you have a certain amount of volume, and then it works. And obviously, if that brand is trying to do something really important in the sustainability space and tap into that consumer need, they might not think about it as the first thing that they address, but certainly they've been challenged on what the impact of their transport is having on their overall model and impact. So I think there's a really nice tie in there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harry. That was excellent. I'm sorry, I know you've got to go, haven't you?
I'm so sorry to cut off, but thanks so much for having me. It's really lovely to meet you all. And any questions afterwards, happy to pick them up.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harry.
Take care.
You take care. Thanks ever so much. Right. Brilliant stuff. So that was Harry. Now we're going to go back to a sort of semi-usual running order. But Roxy just told me that our final speaker, Ben from Pedal Me, can't make it. Is that right? So even though we cantered through that first bit, we're going to be slightly more relaxed now. And we can finish a bit early because it's really hot and a bit steamy. So we're going to go on to the news roundup. Roger, I think you joined slightly after we kicked off, but what we suggested is Bob's quite keen for you to contribute to the news, but know that you've got time pressures as well. So did you want to come in first before we start Bob's regular roundup and give an update from your perspective? Or is that a complete shock and you'd rather not? And
no. Bob did warn me in the chat, as did Roxanne. So thanks ever so. That's great, much appreciated. So what I've been asked to do is just kind of give a bit of an update on the news that came in last week. And no, I don't mean all the political news, although actually those two bits of news did come in all at the same time at a point when some of us on this call were away at the Cycle City Active City Conference in Sheffield, an annual get-together that hasn't been able to happen annually over the last couple of years. And it was great to see other people from around the country who are involved, people from local authorities, from consultancies, cycling advocates, getting together for the first time in 3 years. And as we were all gathered, in came some cycling walking news without a press release, and lots of political news that kept us all talking about lots of things. I'm going to focus on the cycling walking news, although obviously the wider political news may have bearing on the cycling news. I will touch on that at the conclusion of my comments. The cycling news was the appearance of the cycling walking investment strategy. It came out without any fanfare whatsoever, almost unnoticed against the background of the wider political news. I suppose the main headline when you start with follow the money is, well, there's not a lot that's new in there. There's a lot. I've written a blog about this, and I know that Bob will bring a link to that later. There are plenty of figures. There are figures for ring-fenced funding and for non-ring-fenced funding. There's the original figures for CWIS 1 and then how much they actually managed to spend in CWIS 1, which was rather more than what they said they were going to spend in CWIS 1 when they first published it. So they've done well. And then there's how much has it increased to get to CWIS 2. To just go to the headlines, we already knew that there was going to be a 6-fold increase in the ring-fenced funding, which is the bit that we know we can be most confident about. It's only a fraction of the total funding. Nobody really knows how much non-ring-fenced funding they might manage to find over the coming 4 years for CWIS 2. But we have seen a 6-fold increase in the ring-fenced funding. From the sort of 314 million, so over 5 years, to the 2 billion we already knew about. The other reasons to be cheerful for all that we know. So the kind of headlines is it's gone up. We also know that it's not enough for them to meet their targets, and I will say something about what their targets are. It's also still less than what Wales and Scotland, particularly Scotland, are spending. So meeting the targets, what are the targets? Well, most of the targets are ones that we kind of knew about from CWIS 1. So they still aim to double cycling stages, where a stage can be either a trip or a part of a trip, as in cycling to a rail station. They're still aiming to double cycling stages by 2025. They've added, well, we knew about this a year ago, that they've added this new aim to increase the proportion of trips. They've added short trips, which is really unhelpful. The number of trips now, short trips in towns and cities, to 50% of all trips in towns and cities by 2030. And so by 2040, and an interim target to get there to get to 46% by 2030. None of the funding and the targets are not commensurate with one another. We have a transport bill later this year, which I hope will be an opportunity to say, although the government has legal obligations when writing the CWIS to set out the objectives to be met and the resources to be made available for meeting those objectives, it doesn't have any obligation to satisfy itself or anybody else that the funding is sufficient to meet the target. So they can pluck numbers out of thin air for both the funding and the targets, and the two don't have to relate to one another. And that is still a problem. They're still doing that. So I hope we can fix that later this year. We know that they're sitting on evidence that the 2 billion is only about a quarter to a third of what they need to double cycle in trips or stages by 2025. And it's probably the mismatch between funding and objectives is even greater if they're going to achieve another of their longer term objectives, which is to achieve world-class cycling and walking networks by 2040. It'll be interesting to try and quantify what that means and how much money would be needed to meet it. That's on the to-do list. So we've made progress. The other progress, the reasons to be cheerful, before I kind of go purely on the negatives, I have mostly concentrated on the negatives so far, but let's just go back to the reasons to be kind of optimistic. The other things that have changed since CWIS 1, well, firstly, we've now got good infrastructure design guidance, which should in theory mean that all of the money, however inadequate it might be, should in theory at least be well spent, because there's now guidance telling local authorities how to do it. I say in theory because in practice, there's still a huge job of work to be done to make sure that local authorities are trained, that the staff are trained to understand and implement the design guidance we've got. Clearly, Active Travel England is another of the good pieces of news. And of course, they will be playing a role in making sure that local authorities get the training, the support to understand and implement the guidance correctly. So the fact that they are there is another piece of good news. Another piece of good news, of course, is the highway code rule changes. The highway code rule changes, I think I've said in previous ideas with BA sessions, are not just about the direct impacts on driver behaviour, giving way to cyclists and pedestrians when turning across our paths at junctions, but also enabling traffic engineers to design junctions to give that priority visually, as well as in highway code. So that too is a piece of work that will need to be done over the next several years to make sure the local authorities get that message. So plenty still to play for, plenty still to do. And the figures are in the full version of the blog with and Bob will provide the link for that later.
Brilliant. Thanks, Roger. Brilliant roundup. Just one quick question, Roger. Is there a timeline for the transport bill that you mentioned, just so people know?
No, there isn't an official one. There's sort of behind the scenes expectations that it will be published in around September. I suspect that will mean probably after rather than before the party conferences, but the government has not given any official timetable for the transport bill. There is a possible scenario where a change of, I touched on the political uncertainties. Oh, I forgot to say something about political uncertainties. Let me just come back to that, but I'll just stick with the transport bill point. There is, of course, the possibility that an incoming new Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister might decide that the legislative agenda is far too crowded and junk a few things. I think it's unlikely that they will junk levelling up, because that would be a gift to the opposition. But it might be that they decide, well, the transport bill can wait. So at the moment, we're still expecting it in September or thereabouts, but who knows? I mean, we're in a time of political uncertainty. And I did just want to say, well, clearly the other bit of political uncertainty is if when Boris goes, there is a very strong likelihood that Andrew Gilligan will go too. I suspect most people here will know. Andrew Gilligan was Boris's cycling czar when he was Mayor of London, and then became his transport special advisor in number 10. Ministers and indeed Prime Minister is a bit like football managers. When one goes and another arrives, they tend to bring their entourage. So I have little doubt that a new Conservative leader and Prime Minister will bring their own special advisors. And I fear that from that will be bad, that we will lose somebody who's been a very important advocate for cycling and walking inside number 10. So to some extent, we've got to kind of try and make sure that Active Travel England is as well set up in the meantime and as well supported by all of us to make sure that it isn't under threat from the next spending round, because it might be.
Brilliant. Really good point, Roger. We all need to get behind them, don't we? Okay, brilliant. I'm going to pause questions after Bob's news roundup, because Bob, we've left you waiting in the vestibule area for long enough.
Well, I don't know if anybody wants to ask, how long can you stay, Roger?
Give it another 10. So if you want a few questions, I can do that.
Yeah, let's talk to Roger. I mean, just okay. Can I come in with a quick question? Because the legal position is that Active Travel England is formally legally constituted as from August the 8th. Mm-hmm. So I would doubt that someone's going to come in and abolish it within the next couple of weeks. The real problem is this one about when it comes to spending and budgets, that whoever comes in next may not want to support it properly or may want to defund it. Or can you just take us through that?
Yes, I can't take you very far through it because I'm crystal ball gazing like everybody else. You're absolutely right that I don't think there's a risk to Active Travel England in the short term from a change of Prime Minister, but you're absolutely right that there is still a risk at the next funding round. Who knows? We're going to have to work on that. That's how democracy works. The price of freedom and democracy is eternal vigilance, and we're all going to have to be vigilant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Roger. I can't believe we've got a scenario where there's a reason to worry about Boris leaving number 10. That's extraordinary. And
it is an issue that's perplexing a lot of people, not just in cycling advocacy, but in environmental politics more generally. Yeah. A lot of people are thinking, whatever, I've got to be a little careful because I'm representing a non-party political charity, but there are plenty of people in environmental politics who are also very scratching their heads about how come they're fearing the demise of Boris Johnson.
Yeah. and ushering in, hopefully, Jeremy Hunt. What a weird world we find ourselves in, but there you go. Right, any more questions for Roger before I go and scream quietly in a dark room? No? Thanks, Roger, that was ace. Bob, over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Righty-ho. So can I share my screen? Yes. Righty-ho. Okay, so 12th of July, transport in the time of COVID-19, we may call it something different when we come back in September. Basically, it's all about trying to keep up the momentum that we had with gear change and the other measures which were taken in lockdown. And send your materials to me there. And don't forget, we got a nice shiny new website there. I'm still going to be banging on about the war. There are apparently a couple of hundred Ukrainian soldiers killed every day. So, let's keep up mention of it. And also, Mikhail Koval-Anderson is doing this thing here, which you can go to Bikes for Ukraine. They've apparently sent a load of bikes to Ukraine in a Carlsberg van or lorry, very to be Danish about it. While we're on the subject of Denmark, there is a meeting point between cycling as sport and cycling as transport with Chris Boardman, as usual, who on the Tour de France catch-up show on Channel 4 had a nice long chunk on cycling as everyday transport in Copenhagen, talking about how they achieved what they've achieved. So that was nice to see. Sorry, going there. Okay, your victim blaming for tonight comes from Thames Valley Police, West Oxfordshire, usual stuff. And, I do mention it because it is nice to see the kind of pylon that people like this get to their tweets. The Twitter account handler must be wondering what happened to them when you get a couple of dozen people saying, stop the victim blaming and giving information about what helmets can and can't do and what actually happens with the evidence base and so on. Oh, now Ruth and Rhoda, from Family Bicycle, they got a gold Blue Peter badge. There's Ruth and Rhoda. They shot to fame when they were doing a big ride and were giving thumbs up to lorry drivers who gave them a wide berth. So that's nice. Yeah, that's the link for the second cycling and walking investment strategy. And here are the things that it talks about. That was published on 6th of July. So do go to that link. And there's a story on it in Local Transport Today. There's the link. And I've given some of the figures there up to that bear in mind what Roger said about ring-fenced and not ring-fenced. Talking about short journeys in towns without defining what it is, increasing it from 41 to 46%, increase walking activity to 365 stages per person per year, double cycling, where cycling activity is measured as the estimated total number of cycling stages made each year, from the 213 level to doubling it to 1.6 billion stages in 2025, and increased percentage of children aged 5 to 10 who usually walk to school from 49% to 55%, which not exactly massively ambitious, I would say. But the main things to be concerned about is the kind of funding, what happens to the road building strategy, what happens to what kind of government we've got. Will the Labour Party actually start opposing more road building? Will they guarantee to ring fence money for active travel? Or look at what Simon Monk said in the chat, active traveling could be gradually sidelined. Anyway, so we wait and see on that. Here's, I've got some stuff from the deaf cycling people who I mentioned a couple of months ago. They've chosen 3 enthusiastic deaf and BSL. I'm not sure what BSL is. Please tell me in the chat, or otherwise become the first deaf qualified cycling instructors in the UK. And they've been trained, and they're putting their hard work into practice. And last Wednesday, they launched safe cycling sessions at the Lee Valley Velo Park. You know,
British Sign Language?
British Sign Language, yes. Well said, whoever that was. So go to that link to find out more about it. Yeah, reading list. I've mentioned this before about the Centre for London's report on LTNs. If you're in London, here's the thing about increasing the ULEZ. New thing to read in the Guardian about government policy failures are obstacle to UK net zero. There's the Healthy Streets scorecard in London. I'll be mentioning that a bit later. And there's a consultation to do by the beginning of September on motoring offences sentencing guidelines. And we may be getting someone in to speak about that, but that's a consultation you need to have a look at. It's apparently quite a complicated one to do, but anyway, that's something to do over the summer. The new and must read is this blog by Roger Geffen saying the kind of things you've just heard him say. Do go and have a look at that. New short little graphic from Transport Action Network on hidden road emissions. It's to do with what happens when you build roads with concrete, cement, steel, and so on. A good thing on biofuels by George Monbiot. This is a bit of action to do by people in Tower Hamlets. The mayor there, Look for Rahman, is intending to take out low traffic neighborhoods. So there's something to do to oppose them. And now this is something you really must read. It's in Local Transport today. I've got a couple of links, and it's entitled Le Chatelier's Principle, Protecting Road Projects from the Rigors of Consistent Appraisal by Professor Phil Goodwin. And it's really all about the kind of hocus pocus with cost benefit analysis that goes on to justify building big roads for more cars. And it talks about something called Le Chatelier's Principle, which is in certain ways similar to risk compensation, which you should know something about because I talk about it a lot. Okay, that's your reading list. Okay, in the UK, Nottingham, nice graphic, give child cyclists space when overtaking. I suppose you could say you should give all cyclists space, allowing for the wobble. Greater Manchester, bit of bad news. All 10 councils in Greater Manchester have agreed a proposed scheme to scrap a chargeable clean air zone. Instead, they propose to offer financial incentives for motorists to switch to electric vehicles, which is a kind of subsidy for wealthier people. And there's a piece on that from ITV News Granada, bit of bad news from there. And also from Manchester City Council, I don't know if you've seen these adverts, they're on the Tube and other places. Ernst and Deb said, energy guzzling, pavement blocking advert for an energy guzzling vehicle to carry the answer to the energy, health and climate crisis. And I think we've said something about the amounts of energy which these adverts consume before. They do seem to be bad news. Okay, that's from Manchester. And Cambridgeshire, yes, the King's Dyke crossing was opened. It's got a great big stretch of hatching down the middle, and cyclists are supposed to use a shared use cycling and walking path on over the bridge there. So, you know, exactly the opposite of LTN 120. So a bit of bad news from Cambridgeshire. There's a long thread from one of the bloggers in Cambridgeshire about how Cambridgeshire County Council seem to be doing lots of things wrong. Now in London, London Borough of Hackney is now completely covered by controlled parking zones. That's all of Hackney, but good news there. And in the London boroughs of Hammersmith and Fulham and London Borough of Hounslow, CS9 has opened. I did a tour of Hammersmith Broadway and took some photographs of the cycle infra in there. It's actually only covering a part of the Broadway, and I don't know, there are one or two little problems with it. But it's got overall approval, and people can now cycle all along King Street in both directions. One of the things I did point out in a thread which I put on Twitter was that actually back in the 70s, King Street was two-way. So what's happened is gyratories have gone in. We've been kind of trying to claw back safety and space for bicyclists and pedestrians. Hammersmith Broadway used to have a tube station in the middle, which you were only supposed to get to as a pedestrian through an underpass, and we had to, in the 80s and 90s, we had to try and work back to get surface level crossing. So we're really kind of trying to, in many ways, restore the status quo ante. I took some photos today, the rush hour in the morning, Tavistock Place, there's separated cycle lanes going both ways, and the junction Tottenham Court Road looked like that. So a lot of people cycling, going to work in London. Now, this is the Healthy Streets scorecard. I do say that a lot of what they're measuring, you have to be very careful about the kind of metrics they've got, because you might just say, oh, you know, this borough is better than the other borough. And there do seem to be a few anomalies. And I think it's to do with the kind of counting, the kind of data you've got in the 33 boroughs in London. But it's worth, providing you are very circumspect, it's worthwhile everybody looking at it, whether you are in London or not, because you may get some rough idea about the kind of things that are going on, although there are boroughs that are trying very hard, which often appear to be less successful than ones which aren't. So, as I say, take everything with a pinch of salt and be very circumspect. I've just chosen this one page, which is for the percentage of households with no car. And it is worth remembering that the average for London as a whole is 45%. That's 45% of households don't have a car. That's in London, capital city. So, you do get, there is a common myth that everybody has cars. And it's also worth looking at the fact that at the very top is Westminster, a very wealthy borough with a clear majority of households, over 2/3, not having cars. City of London as well, obviously, and Tower Hamlets, where the mayor is sort of pandering to what he thinks is the motorist vote, also has one of the highest proportions of people without cars. And then you go to the outer London anti-cycling boroughs that are still at about 20% of households don't have cars. Okay, so another figure from London, which, as you know, I've spent a lot of time talking about the kind of metrics we use to discuss danger on the road, and something that I've worked at for decades and finally has been accepted in official Department for Transport statistics after some work I did as RDRF with the Parliamentary Advisory Council on Transport Safety, is the other vehicle involved in collisions rather than just looking at the victim. And you see other vehicle involved in sort of overall percentages in 2021. It's cars, nearly 2/3, goods vehicles up at 17%. I know Ben from Pedal Me has been saying you're not going to get that higher level as higher level if you have lighter and slower moving cargo bikes and EVs. Motorcyclists, don't forget, they're not just hazardous to themselves, but they're involved in 6% of total casualties of other road users, even though they're only 1 or 2% of all the journeys. And pedal cyclists way down at the bottom. So that's the thing about which is the other vehicle involved. And it's basically, you're looking at pedestrians and cyclists, occasionally, sometimes motorcycles, and very occasionally people inside cars. But it's trying to pinpoint the source of danger, which is the kind of thing I've been pushing for a while, and which you should too. Right. Now, this is something that Ruth Mayorcas got very upset about, and we've had a bit of discussion. What do we think about this advert? I don't know if Steve wants to do a poll on this. It's an advert for Rally, Zooms Not Fumes. And she's saying, oh, it makes it look like you've got to have a helmet and you're a young lad crouched over the handlebars about to hammer about everywhere. On an electric bike, you're using the E backup to go fast. That makes it look fast. He's crouched over it rather than being a nice, relaxed Dutch lady kind of thing. So you may want to give your comments about what you think about that. A couple of other things, images that have appeared just to finish off for today. First of all, this is an old advert actually from the Swiss Railways. And it's translation, and then he wanted to impress me with his driving license. So that's a nice bit of like anti-car culture stuff. Now, this is an image from Paris. As you can see, this car's been parked in the cycle lane and someone has written over it, cyclists go over the roof. Because he's parked in the cycle lane, there's an area for cyclists, so they kind of carried it on over the car. And of course, at Ideas with Beers, we don't condone writing things on cars or riding bicycles over cars, but it's just an indication of what a fed up cyclist in Paris felt like. Okay, so that's it. Any questions or comments, please, people?
Brilliant. Thanks, Bob. Amazing as ever. Well, Simon.
Sorry, I've got to stop sharing. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
No, you started sharing again, Bob.
All right. So what
you
do
got
I
it right
do?
first time.
Stop share. Yes. There we go.
And don't do that again. It was making us all feel queasy.
Okay.
In, out. Simon, do you want to go first? And then Chris, and I know you need to go as well, and then I'll come to you, Adam. So Simon, Chris, and then Adam.
Yeah, as I said in the chat, I'm very happy to come back on Healthy Street Scorecard and do a full presentation, or get one of the other Scorecard Coalition members to do one. And every year the scorecard kind of adds another few metrics, develops somewhat, and then gets a load of stick from people who look at it and go, but the borough that I hate did better than I thought it would, or the borough that I love did worse than I thought it would, or whatever. So just a little bit on how we do what we're doing with the scorecard, and therefore what it kind of results in is every year the scorecard's aim is to use publicly available or data we can derive and therefore can get our hands on it next year or last year, so we can keep comparing year on year. So we had loads of problems early on with the scorecard where we created kind of data sets and then realized we weren't going to get the same data set the next year. So it has to be publicly available. We can get our hands on it each year, year in, year out. It has to be stuff that the boroughs themselves can actually have some control over. So the input measures and the outcome measures, there's no point in looking at, so we started looking at things like pollution, but the problem is pollution drifts all over London and tends to be related to massive roads that boroughs have no control over and things like that. So there are certain things that when you look at it, you're like, we can't measure the borough on this. We can measure that rough bit of London or what happens in that rough bit of London, but it may not be in the control of a council leader to do stuff. So there's a very tight set of criteria that ends up with results. We recognise, one of the things we recognised is over time is the bits of central London and inner London have like a massive unfair advantage in the overall scores, because even if they do nothing, they've got more public transport links. There's a denser bit of public transport. That's where all the buses and tubes go towards. And so therefore people don't, even if they're very rich, even if they can afford cars, they don't tend to own cars. And then you don't get all of the problems associated with cars that you get elsewhere, etc. So there are some inbuilt advantages. So what I would say this year particularly is have a look. There's two new bits of data this year that I think are really, really valuable. One is density. So we recognise that housing density and PTAL, public transport accessibility, are very closely correlated with the schools. So we looked at taking density out of the equation. And there's a set of graphs that's all about how density relates to the school, or what your density as a borough would lead you to expect to score. And therefore there's kind of a value add, does this borough do better than you'd expect on density or worse? And that's a fascinating graph that's well worth having a look at, because what it shows straight away is there are some boroughs that you'd expect that are doing really well way out the front, above and beyond the density score you'd expect, and some boroughs that you'd expect to doing really badly are doing really badly. The other thing I'd say very briefly is the piece of work that Sustrans, I have to give them props for this, did on bus priority measures. So we can now understand and look at what boroughs are doing in terms of bus lanes, but also bus gates and LTNs to help buses move around. And that's a mega piece of work they did there. So yeah, have a look at the scorecard. Like, fairly obviously at some point we're going to talk about, can we do it nationally? Can someone else do it nationally? There is national data that we could look at other towns and cities with, but I think it's a really valuable piece of work. I'll come back and properly do it at some point.
Brilliant, thanks, Simon. Yes, so that's one for the autumn. I'm not saying that Ideas with Biz is a bit of a geek fest, but we love a bit of data, don't we? A bit of data.
Oh, yes.
So, let's do that.
Yes.
Brilliant, Simon. Anything, Bob, from you on that, or shall I go to?
No, I mean, I took the, I'm just saying that I've spent my life kind of criticising the official road safety lobby and being very circumspect about data. But I mean, there are things that you should look at it. And I just took one slide, which actually tells you a lot of things, and it's very informative about, about something tremendously important, namely what proportion of households in your borough don't actually have access to a car. Do you want them to have access to a car? Why don't you look at this data, and you can compare yourself with other boroughs? So, that's just one side.
Thanks, Bob. Brilliant. Right, we're going to go to the People's Republic of Kirklees. Chris, you ready?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I've asked this in the chat already, but our cycle campaign group has started talking about doing a critical mass ride. I just kind of wanted advice from people that have done them or sorted them, already, whether we go for one big event that we advertise or whether we start something that's a monthly based ride that people just turn up to rather than an organised thing.
Brilliant. Okay, well, so who's got top tips on critical mass? We've got Roxanne, Simon and Graham. Graham, are you coming in on critical mass?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Right, we'll do this quick fire. We're going to do Graham, Simon and Roxanne. Everything you need to know about critical mass in the next 90 seconds.
Okay, well, I don't claim to be an expert because we've just been going for less than a year now. I put the shout out. There's no one organises a critical mass, of course. It's supposed to be a spontaneous event, but obviously someone has to kick the thing off. And what I did was set up a website and a Facebook group, and I made it very clear all the way through that there isn't a specific organizer for this. So if you want to have a look at the website, I've just stuck it in the chat, and that may be helpful. Just take anything you want from that.
Brilliant, Graham. Thanks. Simon?
Yeah, just to follow on from Graham's very neatly. So basically the reason why, folks might not know, but the reason why there is no organiser for London's critical mass and many other critical masses is because the police, if there is an organiser, try and stop it. So this went all the way to the High Court. Basically, London's critical mass is allowed to continue as it is in an unstructured way with no route, precisely because there is no organiser. So if you want to go down that route of having a regular ride and it varying route, and you don't want to mess about with the police and getting approvals, then have no organiser and just let it happen. Start point, you'll set up at this time, over to you. So that's the one thing. And then, as someone just said in the chat very rightly, critical mass is, proving really popular in many cities and is a very, very distinct alternative to critical mass. Certainly in London, critical mass can be quite anarchic, for want of a better word. So whereas critical mass is quite like anarchic, but in a much more toddlery based way.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anne. Elizabeth, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to come in because I knew when Leicester started critical mass, which is 10 or so years ago, one of the big things that worked really well there was having a theme and having costumes, bringing up that it's something that passers-by appreciate, that it's not just the drudgery of stopping traffic. People come out because it's fun. People don't object to it so much on the street because it's a lot of fun. We put quite a lot of effort into making sure that people of all ages and types could attend. And so there is a set of people who will do might be on the night route planning and knowing amongst ourselves where difficult points are, things like that, and keeping an eye out for children. So the critical mass, certainly in Leicester, will have children as young as 3. I mean, certainly we'll have babies on seats, but it will have really young children. And so there is some behind the scenes organizing. And I think in terms of Chris's, what works best, advertising helps a lot. So one big thing that gets people interested then probably can lead to some of the other things that keep it going. So costuming and one big event be from me.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Brilliant. Dressing up, but I draw the line at naked critical mass. I don't know whether you've all had it. We've had it in Manchester. It's an unsettling sight, but there you go. Roxy, you got top tips as well?
I wouldn't combine critical mass with a naked bike ride, just to tip that. I think it's really important that you think about your theory of change. Who are you trying to influence and what do you want them to do? I think is really important, and that should guide what kind of ride you do. For us in Cambridge, critical mass didn't really take off because we kind of have mass already. So how are we getting attention? And for us, I put in a link of the Reach ride, and that is an organized ride that we are responsible for. And I'm happy to share things like risk assessments and insurance and so on, because if you take it on, you've got to take it on. And when you take that on, you do not want to do it once a month. So that in itself is going to probably rule out doing a monthly event. And the whole point of ours is we found an event that was already happening and we cycled to it. So we've just tapped into someone else's publicity, and we now bring 1/5 of the people to this fair. We bring 1,000 people, and we've become more of an institution than the fair that was running for 800 years. Look at what you can do that's family friendly, that's influencing the right people, that gets as much exposure as you can, but also cost effective in terms of your workload. But something like that, the council gives us money for it, and it's a great way of lobbying the council. But happy to have more of a chat offline.
Brilliant. Thanks, Roxy. Yeah, and I think there was an offer there was to share some of the stuff, the gubbins that you need to do it as well, Chris. So you might want to get in touch with Roxanne directly. Adam.
Yeah, just the final one on that. We did have critical mass in Bath, but it was quite divisive or whatever. But critical mass, which started up recently, is much more powerful politically and very difficult to argue with when you're just sitting there saying, please, can my children cycle to school? Yeah, it takes all the trolls and makes them look like horror shows. So it's really, whereas critical mass can just end up reinforcing that sort of hatred of within politics of cycling. Sadly, so yeah, you have to be aware what messaging you're trying to get, where you're trying to take this. If you're just trying to do a protest ride, fine. But if you're actually trying to create a political change, yeah, throwing kids in front of politicians usually works, as you can't help picking them up.
Brilliant, Adam. Thanks so much. Right, Chris, was that useful?
Yes, it has been. Thank you. Yeah, it's one of the difficulties I think for us is that one of the guys that's pushing for the critical mass is in politics, and it's very much of the sports cycling club kind of ilk. And we don't want to push that kind of vision, really. So, yeah, I think critical mass might be a way that we go. But, yeah, thank you. Brilliant.
Final top tip from Stephen is to have a sound system, which I think is a great idea. And on that note, actually, I'm going to wrap us up early because Simon Monk's melting. Many of the rest of us are melting. So we're going to wrap up a little bit early. But we'll go to Ruth in a second if she's come out of the Channel Tunnel. But next week, we will have a sound system featured because we're going to have a speaker who's created a mobile disco on a cargo bike, featuring a disco ball made out entirely of recycled CDs. So it's a Christmas bumper finish, and we're going to have Sustrans talking about the walking cycling city accounts. So that's the plan for next week. Make sure you join us. Right.
Can I just add one quick statement?
Go on, Adam, yeah.
Stats 19 data for 2022 changed, by the way. It now includes the model and make of the car in pedestrian collisions. So theoretically, you can work out the profile of the shape of the car. I haven't looked at the data properly yet. I'm trying to, but it's going to take me a long time to work out whether or not it was an SUV in a pedestrian collision. But that stuff's really, really going to make a really huge difference. But it's such a subtle change. It blew out all the data stuff I've been working with previously, so I had to throw it all away. But that Stats 19 data set now is going to be a goldmine for that type of information to look at profiles of cars.
Adam, can you, I don't think I've got your email. Can you send it to me at my email? Because I want to talk to you about that.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I think we're limbering up for a September data special, just to get really, really excited about it all. That's brilliant. Thanks, Adam. So without further ado, unless anybody's got any other points of order, I'm going to move over.
Do you want to say something about, do you want to ask people what they think about those rally adverts?
Oh, sure, yeah. I can't do a poll, Bob, because I'm also facilitating. So I'm gonna...
All right, okay.
Sorry. I tell you what, if you think the adverts are fine, just stick your head thumb up. If you think they suck terribly and are terrible advertising, put your thumb down. I think they're fine. I think they're all right. Middle for Simon. Quite a few thumbs down, Bob. You win. Right. Ruth, final word, and then we're off.
Okay, very quickly, because I'm about to get on Eurostar. One of my reasons I object to it is that there are several along Cycleway 9, which is the new cycle route through Chiswick, that we have fought long and hard will be a route for people to shop and go to school, and we don't want it as an image of hurtling cycling. But just to say, last time I mentioned green light would change when it's raining in Holland, but the newest thing is called Schwung, CHWUNG, and Schwung is an app you can load that will change every single green light, every single traffic light in the city to green. So in Brabant. If you come to Holland, which I highly recommend, that's the app you need to load, and all lights will change to green for you. Lovely to see you all. Just about to get on Eurostar. Bye.